Good evening, everybody. My name is Omane Abu, and I work for the City of Glendale in the Water Services Department. Joining me tonight is Joanne Toms, who also works for the Water Services Department, and also we have our speaker, Kirti Matura. I'd like to welcome everyone, and the topic for tonight's class is on landscaping for small spaces. So before diving in, let's go over some webinar logistics. So attendees are all muted and the class will be recorded. The recording will be available on the city's water conservation website and YouTube channel in about a week. So we'll be sending a follow-up email that will have direct links that you can access the recording. You can type your questions or comments in the Q&A or chat functions, and Joanne and I will read and respond to as many as we can throughout the webinar. There also might be times that we pause to go over some pressing questions to make sure that everyone's on the same page before proceeding throughout the presentation. The class is scheduled to be 1.5 hours long. We have allotted about 1 hour for the presentation and about 30 minutes for questions. We'll aim to stay on track as we want to be respectful of your time. And if you should experience any significant technical difficulties, please contact Joanne Toms via email or phone. You also received a class reminder. You can reach her email at jtoms@glendaleaz.com, or you can call her at 623-930-3596. And after this presentation, we'll follow up with an email that includes a copy of the PowerPoint. You'll receive the resources, the recording, and a link to a survey. We value your feedback. So if you complete the survey by Monday, you'll be entered in for a raffle to win a gift card to a local nursery. So please be sure to fill that out. It really helps us when we're creating future programs. We want to make sure that we're creating content and resources that are, specific to you and what you guys are looking for. And so let's go over some Zoom attendee features. So here is what your current view might resemble. You can play around with the features so you're comfortable. I know I saw in the chat that some people, this is their first time, so this is really exciting. So thank you for braving this new technology with us today. So you can click and drag the vertical bar located in between the presenter and the presentation to shrink or enlarge the presentation view. You can also adjust the audio settings in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. Some of you are already utilizing the chat, so feel free to send comments or questions using the QA button as well. We'll have that available. Joanne and I will do our best to answer questions during the presentation as they come in, but we should have enough time at the end of the presentation to also answer some questions. I'd like to take a moment to highlight a publication called Landscape Plants for the Arizona Desert. And this publication features more than 200 low maintenance, water thrifty, and beautiful plants that thrive in Arizona. A link to this publication was included in the reminder emails along with a handout for tonight's presentation. Glendale residents can request to have a hard copy of this publication mailed along with many other useful resources. All you have to do is you can email greenliving@glendaleaz.com, or you can call 623-930-3553. And we also have a request form. So you go on our website, you can access the resources there. And if you don't live in the city of Glendale, check with your local water provider. And we have some exciting news to share this evening as well. So this fall, we'll be renovating a section of our Xeriscape demonstration garden to include a succulent garden. And so for those of you who might be joining us for the first time, our demonstration garden actually surrounds the Glendale Main Library. And the renovation will take place just to the east of the library's north entrance. And we need your help, and we are looking for volunteers to help plant succulents. And if you're interested in volunteering, please contact Ann Staley at astaley, STAHLEY, @glendaleaz.com. So enough of me talking. I'm very excited to introduce to you our presenter tonight. So Kirti worked at the Desert Botanical Garden in Phoenix in different capacities for over 17 years after serving 6 years as a garden volunteer. Oops.
Oh, did I jump in too early?
I think so, but that's okay, Kirti. We'll keep it rocking.
Okay.
So she also worked as a horticulturist for Caesar Miser Landscaping and Consulting and Sign Farms, and taught plant materials for the Landscape Architecture program at ASU School of Design. Most currently, she is the program coordinator for the Smartscape training with the University of Arizona Cooperative Extension, and she teaches landscaping and gardening workshops for several municipalities in the Phoenix area. She's involved in various local and national plant organizations and enjoys sharing gardening information in many different formats. Kirti authored the Arizona Low Desert Flower Garden, published by Gibbs Smith Publisher, and contributed to other landscaping and gardening publications, including Desert Landscaping for Beginners, published by Arizona Master Gardener Press. Everyone give a virtual round of applause to Kirti. Thank you so much for presenting tonight.
Thank you. See, I was so excited I jumped in too early. Oh boy. Well, it's wonderful. I've heard we've got a good sized group here joining us this evening, and I think that's pretty exciting. This presentation is going to focus on different approaches and some plant material that you can use in a small space. Some of us have only small spaces to work with, whether it's maybe a patio home. I used to live in a duplex, very, very small yard area, or maybe you've got a larger landscape, but you have maybe a courtyard area that you want to work with to make more exciting, more inviting. So that's what I want to focus on with this presentation, are those smaller spaces in our living environment. So here, an example, we have here a courtyard, and they've got a nice perimeter planting. You can't see all of it, but on three sides of it, basically, there's a nice planting that just adds that wonderful greenery, that connection to nature. In this example, we have a front yard, and a lot of us have on our properties very small spaces to landscape within our front areas, and this is just wonderful. They've selected some plants that are very sculptural in form and fit the space, all except for one. If you were to look, there's a cactus here, most in the foreground, that if you're aware of that plant, if you know the Toothpick Cactus, that is a cactus that can very slowly with age become a good sized tree form. So it's not located in the best spot. It could work in this landscape, but so thinking in terms of plants, how they will mature, and it might be a situation where you'll have a planting and it will be eventually too large for the space. So you're just intending to, when it starts to get a little bit larger, about to overstep its bounds, you would maybe replace it with a younger specimen of that same type or something else. So those are some things to think of when you're working with these small spaces. I think a great way to maximize the amount of planting you can do in a small space is to create different layers. In these two settings, this is a front yard space. They built a retaining wall here, and it gives you an opportunity to have more plants than if they were all in one level. They'd kind of be stumbling over each other. They'd be too crowded. When we create different heights, different layers, that allows it a little bit more planting. This, instead of raising the bed, they built a little sunken garden space here with a fountain. This fountain is wonderful. The height of that feature really connects this lower sunken garden space with the grade of the overall yard. And here's a great example of what I was just talking about, that concept of, plants might be overcrowded if we had them all in one level. With this octopus agave, it's a little hard with the angle to see, but it's sticking over that sunken space, some of the leaves by a couple of feet. So it really does allow you to add these different features into the landscape. Here they've made almost like a terrace situation. They have 2 levels of planting areas to really help give more space for plantings. Especially in this situation, plants were used that were all about, maybe about a 3-foot tall range. And if they were all in the same level here, they just kind of be lost. The ones in the back, they'd be lost. By raising this up, you really get to see these perennial justicias here. With a little bit, maybe a little bit more subtle raised area. This is only about a foot or maybe a little bit higher, but they did even add one more raised feature in here, as well as containers can help create those different levels to allow you more planting space essentially. And this is just so lovely, very simple planting. And repetition is, I think, just as important in our small spaces. Even though I'm a plant nerd and I'm the type, of designer would cringe when they see my yard because it's one of everything. But for really good design, having this repetition of some of your plants at least, it makes it a stronger design. And you've just got this wonderful, simple combination of these giant hesperallos and coral fountain plants here. So these are raised beds that are about, a little over 2 feet in height. And same thing. So with this, you have a walkway around, along this bed that is raised. If everything were at ground level, we'd be stepping on some of these plants, these coral fountains that are spilling over. We'd probably be stepping on some of those stems and flowers and getting scolded by the hummingbirds. Having this raised, we can have those plants, they've got plenty of space, and they're just lightly cascading over this wall. And they have plenty of space, and we have plenty of space to walk around in this small garden area. And they're also using the concept of varying heights. Another really important thing, just as within a big, huge landscape expanse, with our small spaces, we want to have variation in height of our plants. You might not have, such as in this courtyard area, enough space to plant a tree. You could use trellis systems and vining plants to get a similar effect to having that vertical plant feature in your small garden area without having a tree included in the landscape design. That can be a really good trick, a good tool to give you a vertical range of plant height so that everything isn't all monotonous at one level. And they've got even vining plant here on this beam of the structure as well in this little courtyard area. And they've just got some really nice, strong succulent features with accents of a few perennial plants that give it a softer, contrasting texture. In this small space, they've beautifully included height without the use of a tree. They have this vine that is kind of hugging the corner of this building here, along with a nice selection, nice variety of perennials that will have slightly different bloom periods through the year to give some interest and color for an extended period of time. In this garden, they have predominantly perennial plants and very small shrubs that are, maybe not even 3 feet in height, not over 3 feet, to add a vertical element to make it not so monotonous. They've used ornamentation, and that's something else you can do that is, I think, a really nice approach to giving you a range in heights. And here they've got smaller succulents, shorter succulents, and tucked in the back where it's not going to interfere with view of the other plants in the courtyard garden area. This nice big succulent plant. This is just really tough, a really big challenge in a setting like this. It's a little bit hard to tell, but for the hottest part of the year, for the summer season, this little tiny strip is predominantly in sun all day. So you have full sun beating down on these plants, and even reflected light from the garage structure, reflected light and heat from the cement. So they very wisely chose plants that are tough as nails, can take full sun, can take reflected sun and reflected heat, and they just packed them in. There is a design concept that if you're contouring, overall you don't want to have bumps in the landscape. You want contouring to be subtle and more natural looking. There's an exception. In this situation, they do have a hump through the stretch of this bed, but it's very effectively hidden, and it's also sufficiently covered with plant material that the plant material above ground and the root systems are going to hold this soil in place, so it's not going to erode away. And every time there's a rain, and be getting all the soil washing, ending up into the driveway area. So to me, they just did everything right. And with these ocotillos, they have this vertical element to that. That's kind of your plant that will kind of transition you to the garage area here, this taller wall, to your foundation plant that then leads down to these wonderful, magnificent, as I say, super drought tolerant, sun worshiping plants that will have blooms at different times of the year. So I think they just did a fabulous job. They also, I think very wisely, picked a few plants to tie in this front yard. In the background you see here, we have golden barrels here, and some golden barrels kind of continued over to tie it together. So this isn't just like one little island of planting, and then the nice desert landscaping in the background here on the other side. So situations like this can be approached in a way that will give you just a fabulous, vibrant, interesting landscape situation. This is another strip between two driveways. They had a similar approach. That soil through most of that stretch is really mounded high. The plants and the boulders that are so artistically placed there are going to hold that soil in place. And for the most part, that soil surface is covered, but you've got height that allows you to really have a lot of plants included in that area. And here's one more hump that is filled with perennials. None of the very sculptural succulents, but perennials. And this is the peak of bloom in March in the spring. However, even after those pink Penstemons and some of these others kind of taper off with color for the season, there are still perennials in there that will provide blooms through the summer months as well. So, obviously these folks, they put a lot of thought into the combination of plants they wanted to use in these areas.
And Kirti, we have a couple questions that have come through the chat that I thought were relevant to this section. And so someone mentioned, especially I know some of the mounds that we saw, they're asking, are they watering all these plants?
I would imagine, now the one by the garage, I honestly do not know. I would imagine that there is drip irrigation there, but I'm not absolutely certain. In this setting, I know the homeowner, and I know that he had included drip irrigation. Same with this one, the homeowner included drip irrigation running through those humps.
Perfect. And we have one more that kind of ties into that. And so someone asked, when creating the different levels, what do we need to take into consideration for like materials and watering systems so walls are protected from that water damage?
Okay, so that is actually, oops. Oh boy. Addressed in this slide. So many of us have those insane narrow strips between the sidewalk approaching our front door and the house structure. And we're always told, don't have, wet soil up against your house. That's going to really be a beacon to termite activity. So if you're going to plant these areas, you want to choose plants that are the most drought tolerant so that you are watering very infrequently. And this is going to keep the foundation of your house safer. In this example, they've chosen aloe vera, which needs infrequent watering. And in this one, this is, at first I was like horrified when I saw this, but I thought, wow, that's pretty interesting. They have a few aloes here, but also creosote. So they're just training this like some people do. Oh my gosh, I think the term is pollarding. So they're training it like that, where it will take pretty consistent maintenance to keep it growing in that very narrow vertical form. But boy, those creosotes, give them some water once a month and they will be fine. So the same thing with those, like that example by the driveways, by the garages, that ocotillo, once you get it established, it's going to need such infrequent watering that it's really not going to be compromising your structure safety. So I hope that answered those questions. Any others at this point?
Let's see. I think most of them are general questions that I'll tackle in the chat, but I think we're good so far.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Kirti.
Now this strip, it's a little bit wider, so you have more of an opportunity to really have some design features, some taller plants in the background adjacent to the structure, and then the lower ones. So the larger brittle bush and the ocotillo, those are your foundation plants that are drawing you down to the shorter and shorter, smaller plants. And I think a very attractive and very wildlife friendly, I must say, selection with this planting here. But yet it's so drought tolerant. Okay, kind of switching gears to work with a small space so that you won't be claustrophobic. Whenever you have the opportunity, have some kind of an opening to what is beyond. And that helps make the space seem larger. when we close the doors here, that space is going to instantly feel smaller. So if we have an opportunity to have an opening to a space beyond, that definitely helps our small spaces feel not so small. Here, they had this beautiful artistic gate made so that you can see beyond that small courtyard that is enclosed. Here, just having this brickwork where they very artistically offset these bricks, leaving a few inches of a gap. And, you know, as the sun travels through the day, you get some really interesting patterns created. But again, it's an opening that kind of connects you to what's outside. With this courtyard area, they just have a low wall, and even part of that follows through to being more open with just some metal posts. There is a gate here with the same configuration, same design as these posts. So it looks like uniform. So when the homeowners aren't out there, this little puppy can't just run away. But there again, it gives you that feeling that you're connected to the space beyond, that you're not really closed in. Even having a little cutout in a wall, such as what we see here, that can give you that feeling, that illusion of you're connected to the space that's beyond that. If you are in a living environment that, you know, you don't want people to be able to see in, yeah, it's great if you can see out to be connected to the space beyond, but maybe you don't want anyone in the space beyond to be able to look in on you. You could use mirrors. Here are 3 examples. With this one, it's not very large. It's about, dinner plate size, that mirror. But you can see some aloe plants, some succulents reflected. In this mirror, you can see some wonderful artemisias reflected there. And this is a larger mirror that really feels like it's a big window even, that makes your space feel larger because you have a good portion, not just seeing a plant or a few, a good portion of this garden area is reflected, making it seem like you've got another big space beyond that mirror. In our small spaces, think about how the pathway surface, the walking surface, can work for you. Adding some design, instead of having just all plain concrete, a straight, path of concrete laid here, they had an artistic feature, a design put into the cement here that gives it a really interesting dimension and makes that space really feel more open. Also, instead of having a straight shot, especially in a small garden space, that does nothing, I think, but make it feel smaller. So if you've got even a little bit of a curve or zigzag in your pathway, because there's always something when you've got that curve or angle, there's something over there that you can't see. And it just draws you in, even though it's a small space, you can't see everything that is in that garden. So you really want to, go to the other area of that small space and see what is there. Another thing to really think about, this is a really small courtyard area, and even shadow can be a nice feature to make a space feel a little bit more open or larger. And through the day, there's some very interesting shadows created by this Palo Verde canopy that you can see here. So if we had a really dense, say, one of those big, huge fig trees that's so dense in its foliage and branching, you just have solid shade on that wall probably. But with our desert trees, that openness of their branching, that can be an exciting design element on that wall. So even though they don't have a vine planted on that wall to give you something vertical in that area, you've still got something there that continues up, making that space seem larger. Color plays an important part. If you are going to use color on walls in your small garden area, really consider the colors that you want to use. Now, darker colors, when we look at the blue, violet, darker reds, those colors kind of recede. They move away from us. That can make a space seem larger. When we are using lighter colors, like yellow, green, yellow, yellow, orange, those colors, they kind of jump out at us and they can make a space seem smaller. So really consider that if you are going to color walls in your garden space. Is the color you want to use, do you want that to help create that illusion of a larger space? Or if you're not worried about it, then go with a lighter color if you'd like. Seasonal changes are possible even in a small space. This was a townhouse with just the tiniest little garden space there, but they very thoughtfully chose a few plants that are annuals. They only live for one season. And so they can have these annuals come and go and change them from the warm season to the cool season to have a little bit of a different look, even though this is a very small space. So they, I think, did a nice job. They have some nasturtiums, which are cool season growers. And of course, our wonderful spring blooming poppies. When those are done, they can plant something that would give them color for the warm season. This is just that narrow strip along a pool in a yard. And so I thought it was a nice example. They have these perennial pink penstemons that for the springtime, they pop up, they'll get 3 feet or a good 3 feet, maybe even a little taller with their bloom stems. And they'll offer this beautiful mass of color along here. By the time the end of spring, when they're starting to slow down, these bloom stems will get clipped back. And there is a vine here that you don't see, but when we really start to get warmer, that vine will wake up and take off and come up this trellis form here. You can't see it, but there are wires that run along the wall. So that during the summer season and through the fall will give you some nice greenery and blooms also. So there's so many ways you can work with these small spaces. And here's one more example. I mentioned earlier with that poolscape with the giant hesperalloes and the coral fountain in beautiful bloom. Just that concept of repetition, even though this is a nice small garden space, they did repeat that trio of these agaves, or it wouldn't necessarily have to be 3 of the same thing, but 3 things that are kind of similar to each other to give you that nice design form in the landscape. I think this was kind of a big mistake. Okay, a small mistake because it's a small garden space. Here at their front of the property, they planted these Texas Rangers, and these are your basic Texas Rangers that will typically get 6 to 8 feet tall and wide. Big mistake. They have to keep these sheared to make them fit in this area. And along here, they use, I think, a great ground cover. The trailing, some people call it trailing smoke bush or trailing indigo bush. But the thing is, and I don't understand this because I love to have plants spill over walkways, as long as they're not in the way. But whoever's doing the maintenance, they keep this sheared along here, which to me, it just doesn't look so nice. I guess it fits in with the sheared shrubs though. But these could spill over, maybe half a foot, or this is such a wide walk space here. Even if they were to spill over a foot and just kind of lightly soften, this walk area would be great. So I just don't think they made the best selections of plants for this space that's approaching a little courtyard area inside there. I would have chosen some other things. Now, this is a front yard, and it's not very large. They did choose Apollo Verde, and it's a little bit spilling over into the neighbor's property, but not so much that it's obnoxious. And it is approaching the house structure itself. It's a two-story house, but it's not interfering so that it's going to rub and do any damage, create any damage to the home structure with big winds. So I think this is a pretty nice tree selection here. They wouldn't want anything any larger. Certainly I would think. Now this is just wrong. Please, no matter what you're planting, please don't plant a tree a foot or a foot and a half from the foundation of your house. To me, that's asking for trouble. And this is just, it's really just half a tree. They probably started shaving the branches off initially when this was developing, and it probably just none wanted to grow back because there's just not enough light and whatnot here in this narrow walkway. So again, think hard. If you're going to use trees, think hard about what you're selecting, and also think wisely about where you place it. Some trees, they have such aggressive roots. Some trees could actually be breaking the foundation of that building there. In this situation, one of those really tall growing eucalyptus, well, most of the time, coming and going or from the house, the only thing the homeowners are going to see is, a bare trunk. That's not too exciting for me. Single story, so just even aside from it being a real small property, I just don't think this is a good selection for the overall stature of the house. And with this yard here, this is where I used to live. It was a community of duplex houses. So we had these teeny tiny yards, and they threw like 4 or 5 or sometimes like 6 big Texas Rangers or those big Australian sennas in there. And so, so that they wouldn't totally engulf the entire yards, those shrubs were constantly sheared. That's just ridiculous. They could have chosen a few shrubs that'll only get a few feet in height, and that would have been much more appropriate. And here, just like a foot wide, this space, they constantly have to shear these poor hesperallos. This is a big agave. They, clipped all the leaves off, pineappled it, I guess, so it wouldn't interfere with the driveway. There are agaves that, only get a foot wide. So please, please, please use that booklet or go to the AMWA website, and you can use search features with the website version of that booklet that will really help guide you to the right plant for the right place. And you can even include a water feature in a small garden setting. It, I think, just really adds, another dimension, just a wonderful effect in a garden space, even if it's small. So now I want to go through, you have a handout that was included in one of the emails when you signed up for the workshop here. So with that plant list, I'm just going to run through very quickly just some options that you might consider for a small garden space. I've provided the botanical name, the scientific name, and that's what's best to use when you're shopping for your plants. The reason being those names are universal. Okay, there are some that have the botanical name and then something else, that weird Latin scientific stuff in parentheses. Well, those are old scientific names. With the onset of so many genetic studies, plant taxonomists have been kind of reclassifying a lot of things, but whether it's that old synonym, the old name in parentheses, or the new currently accepted name, they are universal. So you might want to, take the list with you. Some nurseries, just like boom, 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 they're really keeping up with name changes. Others, I think, are Palo Verdes, that the botanical name for those, I think, changed like 25 years ago. There are still some nurseries using the old Circidium name, but as I say, they're universal. And it's so much better to ensure that you're getting the plant that you're interested in. Common names can be all over the place and be very difficult. So you've got those botanical names and some basic information. And certainly with that booklet or the AMWA website, you can get a lot of additional information also. So we'll start with some small trees and large shrubs. This is an Australian tree. As with a lot of our native trees, a lot of these Australian trees also have a natural growth habit where they will branch right from the base of the tree, growing up. We can, for a lot of these trees, gradually over time, train them up to be more of a traditional canopy. And that might be more necessary in a small space because you want to have space to, plant something else underneath that understory, or maybe even, to be able to move or sit under it. But just be aware that our trees that are native to our desert, that's their natural growth habit from a good majority of them. Drought tolerant, this is an evergreen tree. It's just like so low maintenance, just a wonderful silvery foliage. In the spring primarily, but perhaps again in the summer with some good rains, you have these brilliant lemony yellow flowers. This is actually a cluster of numerous tiny little individual flowers, giving it this bright color. The leaves are kind of leathery in texture. Initially, they'll have a little bit of a maybe a bronze or coppery coloration to them, and then as they get larger, they will be more of that silvery color with some interesting venation pattern in the leaves. And you can see here when these are in peak bloom, I think it's just so lovely. So very drought tolerant. These are great in full sun or even a little bit of shade. This is a fabulous orchid tree. The Bauhinias lunarioides, they're native to Mexico, and these perform so much better than those Hong Kong orchid hybrids with those big, huge flowers and big leaves. They are not happy here. They aren't compatible with our soil conditions, and our summer extremes are a little extreme for them also. These flowers and leaves are much smaller, but they are still lovely. They're still magnificent. They have a delightful fragrance to them as well. And they're just wonderful small trees. They too would naturally grow multi-branching from the base, but you can do some selective pruning as they grow and develop if you want to raise that canopy. In addition to these just lovely, delicate white flower forms, there is also, here's an example of one that they've pruned up a little bit. And this is one, it's actually growing full to the ground, very dense. And this is, they can be a little open, airy in their form, This one is a little more dense. It's not sheared, but once a year, the maintenance crew goes in with some selective pruning. They have to keep it a little bit lower than it would normally be. That husband-wife situation. The wife's the big plant nerd, and the husband is like, we need to be able to see the mountains in the distance. So as I say, it's not sheared, but once a year selectively pruned. So that's encouraged it to get a lot denser in its branching. So in addition to this white blooming form, you have just a huge flush of blooms in the spring, and then it gets a little lighter through the summer. But there's also a pink blooming form. These aren't as commonly propagated, but if you check around, you should be able to find one of the pink forms if you're more interested in that. They're just so delicate and lovely in their bloom and their foliage. Now here is what's commonly called the Texas olive. It's not an olive. We do have a native smaller large shrub native to just kind of around the border south into Mexico with smaller flowers and very small leaves. This one has unusually large leaves for something that's so drought tolerant and sun worshiping. You've probably seen both of these species, the very small leafed one and this one on freeways, long exit ramps especially. They have been used quite a bit around the valley. So this is evergreen, and in spite of these large leaves, it is very drought tolerant. It will grow with branching from the ground, but you can gradually prune it up a little bit into more of a traditional canopy through time. And these flowers, they're usually a couple of inches wide, just beautiful white with that deep golden center. They bloom during the summer, during the warm season, and they are visited by these wonderful native Sphinx moths. They move and look like hummingbirds, but they're active from around dusk through the night, and they help pollinate a lot of flowers overnight. So they're great. They are related to the tomato hornworms, but they're smaller in size and just lovely, I think, to have visit your garden. This is where that common name of Texas olive comes from. If these guys do their job and pollinate the flowers, you get these fruits that are kind of like a large olive size that will develop and ripen. They are edible, technically. They have kind of an interesting flavor. Oh, the Texas mountain laurel, not edible, but it'll make your mouth water in the spring when it's in bloom. These flowers have a deep scent, like grape bubblegum or grape soda, whichever you, I guess, are thinking more of, but they are just wonderful. These flower clusters are almost like wisteria. They'll bloom in the spring, usually around March here in the valley, and they contrast with this beautiful kind of dark green foliage. Primarily, they have these kind of lavender to purple flowers. There are, however, some available with white flowers or kind of a very delicate, pale, pinkish lavender color. So these are sort of slow in development, but if you do give them supplemental irrigation during the summers, they can be encouraged to grow a little faster. So over time, they'll get to be, even up about 15 feet in height. There is a form that has more silvery, very pubescent leaves that is also lovely, has the same flowers, just a little bit of a variation of the foliage. And over time, as I say, they can get to be, a good 12, 15 feet in height. Now, the seed pods that are really cool, they're like rattles. When mature, the seed pod's super hard to crack. And the seed inside, that's this brilliant color, it is toxic, but the seed pod's super hard. The seed itself has a really hard coat enclosing it. So even though they're toxic, even if a pet or a youngster is, to even get to a seed, generally the seed's going to go right through their system. But just so you're aware, there is that toxic component. The Texas ebony is kind of a smaller tree with a real dense canopy. It produces delightful shade for people and pets. You will have a difficult time getting any other plants to grow in that shade, though it's so dense. These late spring and off and on through the summer will pop out with these lovely fluffy clusters of cream colored blooms that are super sweet smelling. That scent just travels through the air, and they will pop up with good rain. So you could have a good few cycles of bloom and seed production. I think they develop the coolest seed pods. They're really big and thick and stout. I think very ornamental. And they'll hang on the tree, and actually when they're ripened, they'll just kind of split open and drop the seed, and the pods will persist for maybe even a couple months longer. But I think they're very ornamental. So dense shade, evergreen, but it's difficult to get anything to grow under that canopy. The Mexican bird of paradise will bloom in cycles through the year. It'll produce a bunch of flowers, and then seed will ripen, then it'll produce more flowers, seed matures, and these just keep going through that cycle throughout the year. And these are great. They kind of know the space they have available and don't get too wide. So a really nice small tree. With all that bloom and all that seed pod production, though, I would not put one of these anywhere near a pool. I rarely, declare or point a finger at a plant and declare it messy. But this one, it does produce quite a bit of litter, which I think was great because it's going to recycle into the soil and help enrich the soil. Here are a couple examples of the Mexican bird of paradise in a courtyard setting, and just those lovely yellow flowers. This is so underutilized in the valley. It's a tree that just typically has a nice upright growth habit. It is winter deciduous, so you have the bare branches in the winter, but it'll pop into bloom and with new foliage in the spring. Lightly sweet smelling flowers that attract all kinds of butterflies to your garden. So just a wonderful, wonderful tree. Doesn't produce dense shade, but gives you some light shade below. And here is the golden lead ball. And I hope there's one of these still in front of the library there in Glendale. The flowers are, they're bigger than a quarter in size, brilliant yellow in the spring, and just very soft, what we call compound foliage. This is one that we usually have multiple trunks, but you can kind of train it up in its canopy form. And for a really vertical form, the Palo Blanco is ideal. It is very open and airy in its foliage, just gives light shade, but it's delightful light shade. And it has the really cool aspect that annually the bark will peel, it exfoliates, and you have for a while this very smooth white trunk. And then later in the year, that'll start to loosen, it'll exfoliate. It's almost like paper that peels off. And you have these lovely cream color blooms in the spring with the Palo Blanco. If you love mesquites like I do, for a small yard, this is what you want to plant, the screwed bean. It remains the smallest of any of them. It does have thorns, but they're not too bad. I love this one especially because it produces the coolest little seed pods. They're, instead of being more bean-like, they're wound up like a corkscrew, and I think so ornamental. So this is the best mesquite for a small yard. This is a wonderful native of Mexico, multi-branching from the base, but you can Prune it up a little bit if you so desire. In springtime, I mean, you can hardly even see the foliage. It has such dense bloom that will draw in so many different butterflies, pollinator bees. They're just wonderful for a lot of different pollinators in your yard. And it's nice. It's similar to, if you're familiar with the desert fern tree, looks almost exactly like it, but it is much more cold hardy if your area is a little cold, if you're in an outlying area. The yellow bells, if it's not affected by a freeze during a winter, it can get pretty large, 12 to 15 feet in height. This is another one that's going to be branching from the base, but you could prune it up a little bit if you preferred. But just be aware, with a big freeze, it is going to die back maybe considerably. But you could use this as a nice small tree with brilliant yellow blooms all through the summer months. And I just think this is an underutilized tree. It's another nice one that has a narrow upright form, evergreen. And yes, it does have thorns, and it varies. Some of them are very small, and oops, don't be afraid though. Some of them are about 2 inches in length. And it just varies even on one branch of this tree. Very interesting. With these thorny things, you can always, kind of talk somebody else into pruning for you if it needs any pruning. And the Arizona rosewood is another great one. A little bit slow to develop, but not too bad. And it's evergreen. It's just delightful. The flowers are very delicate looking. And then the seed clusters that persist for months after the bloom, I think, are very attractive with that kind of deep rusty color. And these, I've even seen them used as a hedge instead of an oleander. Oh, possible to have something other than an oleander hedge. And just for a few shrubs, our nice petite native pink fairy duster is ideal. Please put it in full day sun so you get the maximum effect of these magnificent, very delicate pink spring blooms. And there are different species of the dahlia shrubs. This is the smallest of the kind of rosy purple blooming ones. And it's delightful. You have a great fall bloom, which will attract butterflies. And you don't even need to do anything. If it's in good, strong light and you don't overwater, it just maintains practically forever this nice mounding form. A little lower growing is the flat top buckwheat. Tough as nails, although it looks very delicate. You'll generally have spring and fall bloom with this wonderful tough one. And there are leucophyllums that do stay smaller. The leucophyllum, the thundercloud, there's also a silver cloud. It gets a little bit larger. The only problem with these leucophyllum candidums, they are the most finicky about drainage of all of the leucophyllums. So if drainage is in question, choose a different species, something like this Leucophyllum zygophilum, the cimarron. It's going to top out if you've got it in full sun and you don't overwater it. It'll probably stay about 3 foot tall, 3 to 4 foot wide, and all through the summer monsoon season through the fall, you have these just magnificent blooms and these cool little cup-shaped leaves on this. So these two are your smallest of those Texas Ranger group, that Texas Ranger group. The Salvia greggii, they're magnificent. They come in all different colors and they are nice and small in stature. And with magnificent spring and fall blooms, they will be drawing in lots of hummingbirds. Choose the color you like. The hummingbirds, they don't care. The nectar is going to taste as delicious, one color or the other. And there are some cultivars and hybrids of the Tacomas that stay smaller. One of them is the Gold Star. A lot of these are also sterile, so they don't produce seed. They're putting all effort into just bloom, 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 bloom all through the warm season. So some of them have more of an orange color. They're some kind of an apricot color. A lot of different Tacomas are available in smaller scale than just the plain Tacoma stands. And some perennials. Oh, chocolate flower. It smells delightful all through the warm season. These flowers will greet you in the morning smelling like sweet chocolate. And blinding you because that golden color is so vibrant. In the spring and fall, you will have just a mound of very aromatic, well, the foliage is very aromatic with the Damianita. If you want something that can go in the shade, our native Arizona foldwing or Dicliptera is wonderful. It can actually grow in full blaring sun all day or light to even moderate shade and still have blooms. It never gets just covered with blooms, but almost all through the year, off and on, you have just this wonderful spotting of these pea-like flowers that are very delicate looking. So this is a great versatile plant to have. And the native verbena, it is just covered with these flowers. Petunias smell like our native verbena. These flowers cover it in the spring and usually again in the fall, attracting loads of butterflies and just filling the air with that magnificent fragrance. Blackfoot daisies also are sweet smelling and also attract butterflies. We have so many things that can add, not just the plant itself beauty to the landscape, but can, be benefiting so many different pollinators and us at the same time, offering scent. Oh, talk about scent. The white tufted evening primrose opens in the evening. Their peak bloom is in the spring, and they'll usually kind of around monsoon season pick up again and bloom some into the fall. The flowers open in the evening, each one only open for one night, and then it will wither the next day when the sun hits it. This is the Penstemon that will give you the biggest bang for your buck. It will bloom usually from around February through March, April, May, probably even into early June. It can grow in full sun. A lot of the other spring blooming Penstemons have a shorter bloom period, and also most of them, especially these days, benefit with a little bit of shade during the summer, but this one's really tough. And you can start with a 1 gallon plant that might have 1 or 2 bloom stems, and year by year, it just seems like they keep adding more bloom stems to make more and more hummingbirds happy. Now for the shade, white plumbago. The white plumbago is native to Arizona. It is very delicate looking, and with the white flowers that are almost star-like, they will just pop out, be very visible, even when they're planted in the shade. So that's a great feature. Now, in addition to having these beautiful white flowers all through the summer, when we get to around November, the foliage changes color. So it's like you've got 2 plants in your yard. Part of the year it's dark green leafed, and then all of a sudden around November, when our temperatures really start to decline, you have this foliage that's kind of burgundy color. With this plant, do not freak out if your leaves look fuzzy. New growth has a filamentous bloom on it that is just protection for new growth. And good wind or rain or water will wash it off, but it's nothing to worry about. A lot of people don't know this plant, think that there's a fungus among us. Now, if you like practically year-round bloom, that's just cheerful, the Angelita Daisy is a great one. The leaves are dark green, kind of grass-like, and the flowers look so similar to our native desert marigold, which has that very soft silvery foliage. The desert marigold's pretty finicky about drainage. The Angelita Daisy, it's just so easygoing. It's great for big containers. It's great in the ground, best in full sun, but it can take light shade. But it's just not nearly as finicky about soil drainage as the desert marigold is. But bloom stem up, it looks so similar. And both of them bloom practically year round, just cycle after cycle. And both will attract butterflies. There are rain lilies that for a good portion of the year, they just look like a little grassy clump. You get a good rain and poof, you have an instant bouquet. There are white blooming species such as this one here, and there are other species that are yellow or pink blooming, or some hybrids that are some just really beautiful pastels. There are some vines that stay smaller in stature. Majority of the vines that we have available for our desert landscapes, they'll easily get 20, 30 feet, the stems in length, and just get all these stems going. So if you've got a small space, that's not really appropriate. Something like this Snapdragon vine is just delightful. Those little flowers look just like snapdragons, and they will bloom pretty much from around mid or late spring through the summer, and then taper off for the winter. There are kind of this pinkish red blooming form, as well as a lavender color blooming form available. So some of these things you might have to hunt around a little bit. They might not, I'd say they definitely won't be available at your big box nurseries, but a lot of our local nurseries carry a lot of great plants. And then coming up very soon, a lot of our botanical institutions, Boyce Thompson Arboretum, Desert Botanical Garden, Arizona Sonoran Desert Museum, and Tohono Chul down in Tucson. Those are places where you can really get the cool, funky things that you wouldn't find at another nursery. There are perennial bunch grasses that are fabulous in a landscape. Not only do they look cool, a lot of them have just a spectacular bloom feature or seed maturing feature in the fall. And also their movement is something that's just so beautiful and dynamic for the landscape. This is amongst the smaller of the Southwest native perennial bunch grasses we have available. Some of them might not be the best for a small garden, such as the deer grass, but there are some wonderful species available that stay smaller in stature. And just a few succulents. I showed you an example of an agave, that one that was like pineapple. That's a species that will usually get 6 to 7 feet tall and wide. We do have some agaves. You've got to do your homework, but some of them will only get like 6 or 8 inches tall and wide. Others maybe about 2 feet tall and wide. So there are species appropriate for a small garden space, such as this agave shydidra with this just magnificent white markings on the leaves and those little filaments, adding such interest to it. Bulbinese, these are succulents from Africa. The leaves look like thick grass leaves. They're very fleshy. These will usually start blooming October, November, December, January, February, March, April. I might have to get some toes up here too. No. Usually they'll bloom from around October through April into May even. So several months of this lovely color. They are best here in the valley with a little midday or afternoon shade in the summer. Nice under a Palo Verde canopy. There's also an orange blooming form available if you prefer that. I don't. Colors, right? And here's a nice petite ice plant. There are some ice plants that'll just, want to spread 5 or 6 feet wide. This is a little, really petite one called Red Spike. It has magnificent magenta flowers, primarily kind of late winter going on into the spring. So the rest of the year, it's just this interesting succulent leaf form. There are some cactus that work very well for our small gardens, such as the Hedgehog Cactus. There are different species of these Echinocereus. Some might have red or orange blooms, but they generally form small clusters that are perfect for a small space. Some prickly pears can get to be huge shrubs or tree-like in form. For a small space, I'd say the beaver tail is your best bet. The only challenge is this is probably the most finicky of the prickly pears in regards to draining. So make sure you have a well-draining soil, and you can plant your beaver tail, and you can see how they get their name. The pads are shaped like a beaver tail. If we were in person, I would kind of shake my hiney so you could see my invisible beaver tail. So you're lucky we're virtual. Magnificent magenta bloom in the spring. They are just wonderful. And that teamed with this bluish gray color of the pads is wonderful. And the elephant food is a great plant. It can get a little bit larger, but it's so easy to prune. It can be used as a ground cover. You can put it in containers. Here it is spilling over a retaining wall. There are so many different ways. And the elephant food, it's beautiful and full blaring sun all day to light to kind of even moderate shade. And there is a variegated leaf form that does stay smaller and definitely has to have some shade. So these are some interesting succulents you might consider. Now, some people call them snake tongue, mother-in-law's tongue. Some plants, I just feel bad for them, the names that they get. Such negativity. The mother-in-law's tongue, there are different species and also a lot of hybrids. So many different types of these. Some stay very small in stature, maybe get 6 to 8 inches tall. Some of them have narrow leaves, some have broad leaves. These are about 5 inches or so wide. Some have rounded leaves, cylindrical. They're just magnificent plants. You just want to make sure if you're planting these that the soil isn't real wet around them during the winter. They will turn to mush very easily if we have a real cold spell with wet soil. But these bloom, and it varies from one type to another as to the fragrance, but they're all sweet smelling. Some smell like sweet coconut, others almost like jasmine. So they're just magnificent. These have to have shade. Even during the winter, these should be sheltered from direct sunlight. But you can have fun with these. They can be a great ground cover, or just you can use them in a container, use them in so many ways. So, and this is one of my favorite with the round leaf. It smells like sweet, sweet coconut when these bloom. So I hope you got ideas for small garden spaces in your landscape. And I hope you've been inspired to try some of these plants. And I really do encourage you to visit the AMWA website to access that landscape plants for Arizona, because online you can see so many more photos of the plants, and there's also that search function. So you can narrow down very easily to a small choice, rather than trying to go through a whole big list of plants. You can narrow things down to help you really focus in on plants that would be the most suitable for your each landscape space that you're working with. Oh, that's even worse. Oh well, that's not too bad. Sorry, the light's changing. I had my natural light first to start out with, but do we have any more questions?
Yes, and thank you so much, Kirti. This is just a wonderful presentation. I know I've been inspired. I love to seeing all the different plants, and there's just so many different options that we can incorporate into our landscape. So this was definitely a wonderful presentation. And so a few questions that we had is, what type of ground cover would you recommend to keep weeds from growing?
Oh, well, something that gets quite dense if you have space for one of those trailing indigo bush ground covers, that would be great because they pretty well, are a mass that won't allow, once they start growing, won't allow sunlight in. So that would help, reduce or avoid germination of weed seed. There is an interesting alternative to turf that has, for some years, the corporate extension has been experimenting with and encouraging golf courses to use to replace some of their non-essential turf, the areas where, they've got to have the manicured turf, but it's called Kurapia, Kurapia. And it's actually, I believe, a hybrid of a plant that's actually native to Arizona, but it can create such a dense mass, and you can actually buy it like you would, for sod, a roll of it, and lay that down, and you really will have minimal weeds with something like that. It stays pretty low. It does get blooms that attract butterflies and pollinator bees. That might be an alternative also.
Awesome. I love those options. Thank you so much.
And you can actually see that at the cooperative extension office in the one of the turf demonstration area.
Ooh, someone might be going on a field trip.
And it stays green all year, as opposed to Bermuda grass. And it's very drought tolerant.
I love when there's a bunch of pros to an option. That's awesome. Another question that we had was, you showed an example of an orchid tree as an option. Could that grow under the shade of a Palo Verde?
Yes, they can. That Bauhinia lunarioides can grow in full sun or light shade. So under a Palo Verde would be, just nice, that dappled sunlight coming through, as long as you have the canopy of the Palo Verde lifted high enough. Because I'd say at minimum, you want to allow a good 8 feet in height. That Bauhinia can get easily, with time, even 12 feet in height. But you want to have it, allow it enough space to get at least 8 foot tall.
Good to know. Love this. So another question we had is, what tree would you suggest along a fence line for privacy, but is non-invasive?
If you want full privacy, something like that Texas ebony, that's going to be a dense canopy that you will have total privacy. If you don't have enough room for that, you could go the route of something like our evergreen hotbush, or that Arizona rosewood that we saw. You could make kind of a hedge with either of those. That would give you, pardon me, they're both evergreens, so that would give you nice screening.
Love the screening. Gotta have that fun outdoor space, but that privacy too. We have quite a few questions coming in. So someone asked, what plants would be best to plant under overhangs that receive no direct sunlight?
That native Dicliptera that I showed you, Arizona following the Dicliptera resupinata, that's a great one. I mentioned it does beautifully in full sun locations to all day light to even moderate shade. So it would, do beautifully under a mesquite canopy. So I would think it would be ideal also for a situation where you have that shade from an overhang.
Love those overhangs. Other questions that are coming through. So George, yeah, we'll send a list of some like nurseries that you can attend to. We'll just give like a general list. So I'll send that in the follow-up email. And then another question was, and I'm probably going to pronounce this and butcher the name, so excuse me, but how about Vitis arizonica or Vitis arizonica? Is Arizona grape a good choice for vine?
Sure, yeah, they do very well here, and they're different ones. Even one of our local nurseries produces a fabulous grape that has just awesome foliage color in the fall, around November before the leaves drop. That is just gets a deep kind of burgundy, almost maroon color. And so, those are both different from your just, regular, more traditional grape vine. But definitely the Vitis arizonica is great here.
I love all the questions that are coming through. This is awesome. I just love the engagement that we're seeing tonight. So another question was, again, probably going to butcher it, but what about Parenchytha in direct sun and reflected sun?
Oh, Pyracantha.
Oh, Pyracantha.
Sorry, duh. I just thought, oh, I can open up the chat myself, the Q&A. The Pyracantha. That's one I think, since we're getting more extreme in our temperatures and so forth, we were just having a big discussion about this for a plant list, the official AMA plant list for right-of-way plantings. I think just this past week we were having a discussion about this plant, and we really don't feel like it's the best suited for our conditions here in the valley. Although it's been used for a long time, for decades and decades in the valley, it seems like it's struggling more and more. So I would choose something else other than the Pyracantha.
Okay. And then another question is,
you
where's
probably
the
didn't want to hear that.
Got to keep it to them straight though. You got to be realistic. So I love that. You're being honest, Kirti. And someone asked, where's the extension office? We'll include the address in the follow-up email, but in case you want to read the address aloud for those who want to jot it down right now.
Yeah, it's 4341 East Broadway. So it's in Phoenix, right near the 48th Street, just west of 48th Street. So if you're familiar with 143, that Hohokam Expressway, we're just west of there. So easy access from I-10 or 143 and on Broadway there in Phoenix.
Ooh, and do you have hours that they should come to visit before you're open?
The main portion of the demonstration gardens is available 24/7. There is one area where that Carapia, the turf demonstration area, that is gated. So it's usually locked and closed in the weekends and at night. But it's usually open from 8 till 4 on weekdays. And just a lot of different plants to see there. I would encourage you, some that you wouldn't see at your Glendale Library demonstration garden, which is fabulous. You guys are so fortunate to have that there in your community. And I will say for nurseries, there are a couple of wholesalers who do sell to a couple of the big box nursery centers. But for the most part, at the big box centers, a lot of those plants come from California, or maybe, someplace else, maybe even back east. So they're not the best for our gardens. So I really do encourage you to do most of your plant searching at some of our locally owned nurseries. And we've got quite a few of them around the valley. And then definitely check out those botanical institution plant sales. Most of those occur in spring and fall. Yeah.
Yes, definitely go on some adventures and just go and absorb the different, demonstration gardens and see what kind of plants look like in person. It's one thing to see them online, but it's really another experience to see them in person and just to see how big they get.
That's another thing at that NWA website. You can see a listing of demonstration gardens because most of our municipalities around the valley have some sort of a demonstration garden. And you can see, their listing is there on the NWA website, which Arizona Municipal Water Users Association, keep saying NWA. But you should be frequenting their website. You can get so much helpful information for your landscapes and also information about our water conditions here in the state. But it's really fun to just, go see plants, mature specimens in different settings and different gardens around the valley. Yeah, maybe when it's a little cooler, right?
Yes, that's the ideal time, right? It's all about that temperature here. We have a few other questions that have popped through. So someone had asked, we have a few people tuning in from Australia, which is really, really cool. And so one of them asked, have you guys tried mooring? Oh, I'm probably going to butcher this. Mooring Druhardi. And I guess they grow really well in the hottest parts of Australia. So maybe that's something to check out.
I'm not, is that in the chat or the Q&A?
It was in the chat, so you might have had to scroll a bit. Let me type it to you and then I'll type it in the chat right now. I
see something from Australia, but I don't see that plant. Okay. I am not familiar with that. But so many fabulous Australian plants are used in our landscapes here in the valley. A lot of them, they're like super drought tolerant, super cold hardy, and just totally happy with our soil conditions here. So this is something maybe we should investigate. Thank you.
Yes, love learning about new plants. That's always a great, great takeaway. The learning never stops. Another question that we had was, can lilacs grow in the valley? I saw that somewhere if they die, you can add something to them and they will come back to life.
Please don't. There is a fabulous large shrub. Okay, a lot of people, we all have different olfactory systems. A lot of people claim that it smells like vanilla, but I think they are people who have not experienced the true fragrance of lilac flowers. I grew up in Michigan, so I know what lilacs smell like. And we have a native bee brush that I would guarantee will remind you of lilac scent. And it is long blooming and it attracts butterflies, hummingbirds, pollinator bees, and also finches when the seeds develop. So it takes up space. You need, I'd say, at least a good 8 feet, space to fit it, but it's a fabulous plant. And it can be kind of trained into a small tree if you don't have that 8-foot space. Gradually over time, you can prune it up, choose a couple of its main branches from the base. But that, please don't. So don't fiddle with lilacs. They definitely don't like our temperatures. They don't like our soils. They just don't like anything about our area. So the bee brush is Aloysia gratissima. And it's just a delightful shrub. Anything else?
I think George, you're asking if it's, spelled differently, maybe. Okay, there might be a different way to spell that plant. So we'll take note of both. And I think we've captured all the questions unless there's any more trickling in right now. So I'll just do some housekeeping, and then if there's any, you guys have any last minute questions, I'll let you type them out since in the age of Zoom, it takes time to type versus just raising a hand and speaking. So I'll just do a few closing reminders. So our next class in our Green Living series is Save Money, Energy, and Water at Home. So this class will be offered in partnership with SRP. And this class will also be held via Zoom, but it'll be held on Tuesday, September 28th from noon to 1 p.m. So please note that this is not an evening class. This is like a lunch hour class. So it'll be from noon to 1 p.m. And then for those who might have joined us later, you will all receive a follow-up email with the PowerPoint recording and a link to the survey. Again, we value your feedback. And if you complete the survey by Monday, you'll be entered in to win a free gift card from a local nursery. And in that time, let's see if there's any other questions that have come through. Yes, we will definitely send you the link for the upcoming class. Yes, the lunch hour class. All right.
Thank you all for joining us this evening.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. And thank you, Kirti, for an amazing presentation as usual. I know I learned a lot. I know our attendees learned a lot, and this is just such a great resource. And I hope some people took away some new plants. I know I did.
Thank you.